I didn't raise my voice when my mother slid the envelope across the kitchen counter and said, almost casually, "We already handled it. There's nothing for you to sign." No argument, no explanation, just that sentence, delivered while she kept her back turned, rinsing a coffee mug like the conversation didn't matter, like I didn't matter. What she didn't realize was that this was the exact moment something inside me went very still. Not numb, not broken, just clear. Because when someone removes your right to choose and expects you to accept it quietly, that's not love. That's control. And control only works when you don't see it for what it is. My name is Lauren Whitmore. I was 32 years old that winter, old enough to know when I was being managed instead of cared for, but young enough that everyone in my family still spoke to me like I was temporary, like my opinions were something I'd grow out of. The envelope was thick, legal-sized. My last name was typed neatly on the front in my father's familiar block lettering. Inside it was supposed to be a copy of my grandmother Eleanor Whitmore's updated will, the one we were all finally going to review together, according to my parents. Instead, it was empty. I stood there for a moment, my hands resting flat on the counter, listening to the dishwasher hum and the clock tick above the stove. My younger sister Hannah sat at the table, scrolling on her phone, legs tucked under her like she owned the place. My father was in the living room, pretending to watch the news. "So," I said calmly, "I'm excluded?" My mother shrugged without turning around. That's not the word I'd use. It never is, I thought. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was just the first time it involved paperwork. Growing up, I was the dependable one, the child who didn't make noise, the one who remembered birthdays, smoothed over arguments, took care of things quietly, so nobody else had to be uncomfortable. When my parents' small family business struggled, I stepped in after college instead of taking the job I'd been offered in Chicago. When my grandmother's health declined, I moved back home for a few months that turned into years. Hannah, on the other hand, was encouraged to explore herself, to live freely, to follow her heart. My parents called her spirited. When she dropped out of school twice and came home engaged to a man nobody trusted, they said she was finding her way. I was finding mine, too. I just did it without asking for applause. The Whitmore family business was a regional event planning company built by my grandmother decades earlier. Weddings, corporate galas, charity events. It wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable, and I ran most of it by the time I was 30. Contracts, vendors, staffing, budgets. My grandmother trusted me with everything, except the illusion of authority. "Someday," she'd say, patting my hand, "this will all be yours girl's responsibility." Responsibility, not ownership. When Eleanor passed away the previous spring, we were all devastated. Or at least, that's what we told people. What really followed was a quiet reorganization that happened behind closed doors. Meetings I wasn't invited to. Decisions I heard about after the fact. Subtle shifts in language. My parents started saying, "We've decided," instead of, "What do you think?" I told myself I was imagining it. I always did, until that envelope. "Lauren," my father finally said from the couch, not looking at me. "Your mother and I agreed this was for the best." "For who?" I asked. "For the family," he replied. That vague phrase people use when they don't want to say a specific name. I nodded slowly. "And Grandma's wishes?" Hannah laughed softly without looking up from her phone. "You're being dramatic. Grandma wanted things simple." Simple. Another word that usually meant unequal. I didn't argue. I didn't demand to see documents or raise my voice or accuse anyone of betrayal. I'd learned long ago that confrontation only made them defensive, and defensive people tell better lies. Instead, I picked up the empty envelope, folded it once, and slipped it into my bag. "Dinner's at 6, my mother said, finally turning around. "Don't be late." I left without responding. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and searched for something I'd never thought I'd need. Estate attorney, probate law, inheritance disputes. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't angry enough for that yet. I just wanted to understand what had been done without me. What I found was worse than I expected. According to public records, my grandmother's will had been amended 6 months before her death. A trust had been established, the business assets reassigned, control consolidated, Hannah listed as primary beneficiary, my parents as executors. My name appeared exactly once, in a clause that described me as previously compensated. Compensated for years of unpaid overtime, for putting my life on hold, for believing that family meant fairness. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, the weight of it pressing in slowly. Not grief, recognition. They hadn't forgotten me. They had planned around me. And in that moment, I understood something that would change everything. The people who taught me to be loyal had been counting on it, counting on my silence, counting on my fear of rocking the boat. They had taken away my seat at the table and assumed I would still serve the meal. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. The first thing I did the next morning was nothing. No angry calls, no emotional texts, no dramatic confrontation demanding explanations that would only be carefully rewritten to make me sound unstable. I made coffee. I sat by the window of my apartment and watched people walk their dogs, like nothing in my world had shifted. That restraint wasn't weakness. It was instinct. Because when you finally realize you've been maneuvered into a corner by people who know you too well, the most dangerous move is letting them see you react. By noon, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Can you stop by tonight? We should talk." Not apologize, not explain. Talk. As if this were a misunderstanding, not a calculated decision involving lawyers and signatures. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to the office. The Whitmore Group occupied the second floor of a renovated brick building downtown. Exposed beams, white walls, framed photos of weddings I'd coordinated myself, brides smiling under arches I designed, events that ran flawlessly because I'd stayed up until 3 a.m. fixing what other people forgot. When I walked in, the receptionist looked startled. "Oh, hi, Lauren. I didn't know you were coming today." "I work here," I said evenly. She smiled awkwardly and went back to her computer. My office door was open. Inside, my desk had been adjusted. My filing cabinets were gone. The shelf where I kept vendor contracts was empty. In its place sat a single plastic tray labeled temporary. I stood there, taking it in, noticing the faint smell of lemon cleaner. Someone had been thorough, efficient, like erasing a chalkboard. "Hey," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Mark Benson, our operations manager. He looked uncomfortable, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "They didn't tell you?" he asked. "Tell me what?" He hesitated. "Your parents said you were transitioning out, that Hannah's taking a more active role now." Transitioning out. Another soft phrase designed to cushion the blow. "When did this happen?" I asked. "Yesterday afternoon," he said quietly. "Right after the will meeting." "Of course it did." I nodded once. "Did they say why?" Mark looked down at the floor. "They said it was a family decision." There it was again. The family. Always invoked like a shield. I thanked him and sat down at the strip desk, opening my laptop. Most of my system access still worked. They hadn't thought to revoke that yet. Or maybe they assumed I wouldn't check. I pulled up the company files, vendor lists, client contracts, financial projections. Everything I'd built over the last 7 years was there, organized the way only I understood. I wasn't hiding anything. I'd never needed to. What struck me now was how dependent they were on it. By mid-afternoon, Hannah appeared in the doorway. She was dressed like she always was when she wanted to look capable. Structured blazer, heels she could barely walk in, hair pulled back too tight. She smiled like we were meeting for coffee. "Hey," she said. "Didn't know you'd be here." "I work here," I repeated. She waved a hand dismissively. Well, technically. She stepped inside and perched on the edge of my desk, like it belonged to her already. "Mom said you were upset," she continued. "But this isn't personal. Grandma just wanted things streamlined." "Streamlined for you," I said. She laughed lightly. "You're always so intense." That word, intense. The label they slapped on me whenever I noticed patterns they preferred to ignore. "You don't even want this responsibility," she added. "You like doing the behind-the-scenes stuff. I'm better with people." I looked at her. Really looked. The way she avoided my eyes. The way her fingers tapped nervously against her phone. "Do you know how to read a vendor penalty clause?" I asked calmly. She blinked. "What?" "Do you know which clients have termination rights triggered by late delivery?" I continued. "Do you know which insurance writers we need for outdoor winter weddings?" Her smile faltered. "Lauren, you're being condescending." "No," I said. "I'm being factual." She crossed her arms. "Dad said you'd react like this, that you'd try to undermine me." There it was. The narrative. Already written. I stood up slowly. "I'm not undermining anything. I'm stepping aside, remember? That's what you wanted." She frowned. "So you're quitting?" "I didn't say that." She studied me, suspicion creeping in. "Then what are you doing?" I met her gaze, my voice steady. Observing. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. That evening, I did go to my parents' house. Not to argue. To listen. They sat me down at the dining table, where we'd had every Thanksgiving dinner, every forced celebration pretending we were closer than we were. My mother clasped her hands tightly. My father cleared his throat. "We didn't think you'd take it this hard," my mother began. I nodded. "You didn't think about me at all." "That's not fair," my father said quickly. "You're strong, independent. Hannah needs more support." There it was. The justification I'd heard my entire life. "You decided I'd be fine without asking," I said. My mother leaned forward. "Lauren, you've always been so capable. We assumed you'd understand. Understand that love came with conditions. That belonging required obedience." "Did Grandma know?" I asked quietly. They exchanged a glance. "She trusted us," my mother said. That was answer enough. I stood up. "I won't be coming to work anymore." My father stiffened. "You can't just walk away. You know how much we rely on you." I paused at the doorway, turning back to them. "You should have thought about that before you decided I was expendable." That night, I emailed an attorney I'd found earlier that day. A woman named Patricia Klein, who specialized in probate disputes and family business separation. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand. I asked one question. "What are my options?" Her response came an hour later. "You have more leverage than they think." I sat back, feeling something unfamiliar settle in. Not rage, resolve. Because the truth was becoming clearer with every quiet step. They thought they'd taken control. What they'd actually done was force me to stop protecting them. And that was a mistake they wouldn't understand until it was too late. Patricia Klein's office was on the 12th floor of a downtown building that smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. The kind of place where decisions were made quietly and consequences arrived months later, neatly documented and impossible to argue with. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because I'd learned long ago that being punctual was one of the few forms of control no one could take from you. Patricia was in her late 50s, silver hair pulled back, glasses perched low on her nose. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tell me everything," she said, clicking her pen. So I did. Not emotionally. Chronologically. I told her about my grandmother, about the business, about the years I worked without formal ownership or compensation, beyond a salary that never quite matched my responsibilities. About the amended will I hadn't been shown. About the trust. About being described as previously compensated. She listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for dates, names, documents. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "They didn't just sideline you," she said. "They structured this to make you disappear." That word landed heavier than I expected. "Is it legal?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Parts of it, not all," she explained slowly, carefully. My grandmother had transferred business ownership into a trust while she was already in cognitive decline. The timing raised questions. The beneficiaries raised more. And then there was my role. "You were integral to the operation," Patricia said. "You weren't a passive employee. You were an asset. And assets create leverage." I frowned. "I never had my name on anything." She smiled faintly. "Paper doesn't tell the whole story. Contribution does." By the time I left her office, my hands were steady. Not because everything was solved, but because for the first time, someone had validated what I'd felt for years. That this wasn't just unfair. It was deliberate. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched the Whitmore Group unravel in small, almost invisible ways. Hannah missed deadlines. Vendors started calling me directly, confused about changes that hadn't been communicated. A florist I'd worked with for nearly a decade pulled me aside one afternoon and whispered, "Is everything okay over there? Things feel off." I smiled politely. "I'm no longer involved." That phrase became my shield. At home, the silence from my family was loud. No calls, no messages, no invitations. Thanksgiving passed with a single group text. "Hope you're well." Christmas came and went with a gift card mailed without a note. It would have hurt more if I hadn't already understood what it meant. They weren't worried about me. They were waiting me out. The assumption was simple, that eventually I'd miss the routine, the familiarity, that I'd come back quietly and accept whatever role they handed me, grateful just to be included. They didn't know I was preparing something else. Patricia filed a formal request for documentation related to my grandmother's estate. Nothing aggressive, just enough to force transparency. My parents responded through their own attorney, a man named Douglas Merritt, who specialized in family mediation. Mediation is what people suggest when they want you to compromise without admitting fault. We met in a neutral office. Long table. Bottled water no one touched. My mother looked tired. My father avoided my eyes. Hannah sat rigidly, jaw tight. "Lauren," Douglas began, "everyone wants to move forward constructively." I nodded. "So do I." "Your parents are open to discussing a settlement," he continued. "Perhaps a one-time compensation package." "For what?" I asked. "For your contributions," my father said quickly. "We recognize you did a lot." Did. Past tense. Like it was already buried. I glanced at Hannah. She stared straight ahead. "I'm not interested in a payout," I said calmly. My mother's eyes widened. "Then what do you want?" I took a breath. "I want my name removed from the trust language that implies I've been compensated fairly. I want formal acknowledgement of my role in building the company. And I want access to the records related to Grandma's capacity when the will was amended." The room went very still. "That's unnecessary," Hannah snapped. "You're trying to cause problems." "No," I replied. "I'm addressing one." Douglas cleared his throat. "If this escalates, it could get complicated." "That's usually what happens when people don't tell the truth," Patricia said evenly. It was the first time I'd seen my parents look genuinely afraid. Not of me, of exposure. After the meeting, my father called me for the first time in weeks. "You're tearing this family apart," he said. I leaned against my kitchen counter, the same place my mother had slid that empty envelope. "I didn't tear anything apart," I replied. I stopped holding it together. There was a long silence on the other end. "You've changed," he finally said. "Yes," I agreed. I had to. That night, I received an email from a former client, then another, and another. They weren't looking for drama. They were looking for stability, for someone who knew what they were doing. I started consulting quietly, legally, on my terms. The money wasn't the point. The independence was. Weeks later, Patricia called. "We have grounds to challenge the trust," she said, "and leverage to negotiate something your family won't like." I closed my eyes, not in relief, but in clarity, because this was no longer about inheritance. It was about reclaiming the version of myself they'd counted on me never becoming. And somewhere between that empty envelope and this moment, I realized something else. They had mistaken my silence for compliance. They were about to learn the difference. By the time February arrived, the Whitmore Group no longer felt like my family's business. It felt like a fragile structure, held together by habits I'd built and people who didn't know how to replace them. I knew this not because anyone told me, but because patterns always speak before people do. Invoices were paid late. Vendors started adding "per our last conversation" to emails. Clients who had never once questioned a timeline suddenly asked for confirmations in writing. The kind of small fractures that don't look dangerous until the entire surface gives way. I stayed quiet. That was the hardest part. Not defending myself, not correcting mistakes, not stepping in when I knew exactly how to fix things in 10 minutes. Silence is uncomfortable when you've been trained to be the solution. But silence was also strategic. Patricia advised me to document everything. Not aggressively, just accurately. Dates, emails, shifts in responsibility, proof of reliance, proof of exclusion. "Let them continue as they are," she said. "Systems reveal themselves under pressure." Pressure arrived sooner than expected. It started with a wedding in early March, a high-profile one. Winter-themed, outdoor venue, tight permits, zero flexibility. I'd planned the original logistics months earlier, then handed them off when I was transitioned out. 2 days before the event, my phone rang. It was Hannah. I stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds before answering. "What do you need?" I asked. Her voice was tight. "The county just flagged the heating permits. They're saying the backup generators aren't compliant." I leaned against my desk. That was addressed in the original plan. "Well, they're saying it isn't now," she snapped. "And Dad says you handled this last time." I said nothing. "Lauren," she continued, softer now, "can you just tell me who you called?" There it was. Not an apology, not accountability, just expectation. "I don't work there," I said calmly. "You can't just let this fail," she shot back. "It'll embarrass the family." I closed my eyes. "That's not my responsibility anymore," I replied. She hung up on me. The wedding went forward. Barely. Guests complained. The bride left a neutral review that everyone knew meant disappointment. The venue added a compliance fee the company hadn't budgeted for. No explosion, just erosion. A week later, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked smaller somehow, less certain. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said, standing in my doorway. I didn't invite her in. "You didn't recognize me when I was carrying everything," I replied. She pressed her lips together. "We did what we thought was right." "For who?" I asked again. She hesitated. "For harmony." Harmony. The word families use when they mean silence. "I'm not punishing you," she said. "I just don't understand why you're being so cold." I studied her face, the practiced concern, the fatigue that came not from guilt, but from inconvenience. "I'm not cold," I said. "I'm done sacrificing myself to keep other people comfortable." She left without another word. 2 days later, Patricia forwarded me an email from Douglas Merritt. They wanted another meeting. This time, their tone was different. They offered a revised settlement, partial ownership, a consulting role, a seat at the table. Too late. I met Patricia at her office instead. "They're panicking," she said. "The trust isn't as airtight as they thought, And now, they're feeling operational consequences. What happens if I don't settle? I asked. She folded her hands. Then this becomes public record. Depositions, medical evaluations, timelines that don't align. I exhaled slowly. I don't want to destroy them, I said. She nodded. I know. That's why you're dangerous. That night, I received an email from my father. Subject line: we need to talk. The body was short. You've made your point. Let's fix this before it goes too far. I stared at the words, feeling nothing. My point had never been to hurt them. It had been to stop being erased. I replied with one sentence: all communication should go through my attorney. The next morning, I signed papers to formalize my consulting business. Not because I needed to, but because it made something official inside me. I was no longer waiting. By the end of March, 3 longtime employees had quietly left the Whitmore Group. One called me afterward. They don't listen, she said. They just assume someone will clean it up. I didn't say who that someone used to be. When Patricia called again, her voice was calm but precise. They've agreed to mediation under revised terms, she said. Full disclosure, independent review, an acknowledgement of your contributions. I closed my eyes. Good, I said. Schedule it. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, the city lights flickering outside my window. For years, I'd believed love meant endurance, that family meant staying even when it cost you pieces of yourself, that walking away was failure. Now I understood something else. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't confrontation, it's withdrawal. And the people who benefited most from your silence are always the ones most disturbed when you stop providing it. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in April, the kind of gray, undecided day that felt appropriate for conversations nobody wanted to have out loud. I arrived early again, not to prove anything, just to remind myself that I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. The room was larger than the last one, a deliberate upgrade. Long, polished table, 2 pitchers of water, a box of tissues placed carefully in the center, like an accusation. Patricia sat to my left, calm, unreadable. Across from us, my parents arrived together. Hannah came in a few minutes later, eyes red, jaw set. No one smiled. Douglas Merritt cleared his throat. Thank you all for being here. The goal today is resolution. Patricia nodded. The goal today is accuracy. That was the tone shift. Subtle, but immediate. We began with documents, financial statements, trust language, medical records related to my grandmother's last year. I watched my parents grow visibly uncomfortable as timelines were placed side by side. Dates that didn't quite align. Decisions made during periods when Eleanor's physician had noted cognitive decline. My mother clasped her hands tightly. We were trying to protect her. From whom? Patricia asked. Silence. Hannah finally spoke. This is turning into an interrogation. No, I said quietly. It's a clarification. She turned toward me sharply. You don't care about Grandma's legacy. You just want control. That stung more than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it revealed how little she'd ever seen me. I cared enough to show up every day, I replied. Enough to keep the business running when no one else wanted to. Enough to be trusted with everything except a voice. Douglas raised a hand. Let's refocus. Patricia slid a folder across the table. This outlines Lauren's documented contributions over 7 years. Uncompensated labor. Revenue directly attributable to her management. Client retention rates during her tenure. My father stared at the pages like they were written in a foreign language. We didn't realize, he said weakly. That's not the same as it not being true, Patricia replied. The room felt tight. Heavy. Then Patricia did something unexpected. She turned to me. Lauren, what outcome do you want? Everyone looked at me. Not settlement numbers. Not percentages. Me. I took a breath. I want my name cleared, I said. I want the record to reflect reality. I want formal acknowledgement that I was excluded, not compensated, and I want a clean separation. No consulting role, no partial ownership, no future leverage over me. My mother's eyes filled with tears. You're cutting us off. I didn't respond immediately. I'm creating boundaries, I said. You can call it whatever you need to, Hannah scoffed. So you walk away and let us deal with the fallout? I walked away months ago, I replied. You just didn't believe me. There was a pause. A long one. Douglas leaned back. If we agree to these terms, the trust will need to be amended. There will be tax implications. Public filings. Yes, Patricia said. Truth has consequences. My father rubbed his temples. This will hurt the company. I met his eyes. So did ignoring the person who was holding it together. That was the first time he really looked at me. Not as the reliable daughter, not as the fallback plan, but as someone who had power he no longer controlled. The mediation ended without a signature. That wasn't a failure. It was a crack. 2 days later, I received a call from Mark Benson. They're scrambling, he said quietly. Hannah's overwhelmed. Your parents are blaming each other. Clients are asking questions. I thanked him and hung up. That evening, my father called, not to negotiate, to confess. We didn't think you'd leave, he said. We thought you'd be upset, then settle. I closed my eyes. That was the problem, I replied. You thought about what you needed, not what it was costing me. There was a long silence. I don't know how to fix this, he said. You can't, I replied. You can only stop making it worse. The next week, Patricia called with an update. They're ready to agree to your terms, she said. Full acknowledgement, trust amendment, formal separation. I felt something release in my chest. Not relief. Finality. We scheduled the signing for the following Friday. No ceremony, no speeches. Just paper. That morning, I dressed simply. No power suit. No statement jewelry, just myself. As I signed the documents, my hands steady, I felt the weight shift. Years of quiet endurance lifting, replaced by something lighter but firmer. Agency. My mother didn't look at me when she signed. Hannah's pen shook slightly. My father's signature was slower than I remembered. When it was done, Patricia gathered the papers and stood. This concludes the matter, she said. As we filed out, Hannah stopped me. You really don't care anymore, do you? She asked, her voice brittle. I studied her face. The familiar resentment, the fear underneath it. I care, I said, just not at the cost of myself. She turned away without another word. That afternoon, I walked out into the spring air and felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not because everything was resolved emotionally, but because the legal truth now matched the lived one. I was no longer theirs to manage. And that realization, more than any inheritance or revenge, was the moment everything truly changed. The weeks after the signing were quieter than I expected. No dramatic fallout, no public scandal, just a slow, unmistakable shift in gravity. The Whitmore Group amended its filings. The trust language was updated. My name was removed from every sentence that implied obligation without authority. On paper, it looked clean, clinical, almost respectful. In reality, the silence from my family deepened. Not the angry kind, the careful kind. The kind where people don't know what version of you they're allowed to talk to anymore. I didn't reach out. Instead, I focused on building something that didn't require permission. My consulting work expanded naturally. Former clients referred me, vendors followed, not out of loyalty to my last name, but trust in my work. I registered a new company under my own name. Nothing flashy, just solid, sustainable, mine. Then the call came. It was Patricia, her voice measured but alert. Something's changed, she said. Your parents are restructuring the company. That's not my concern, I replied. It might be, she said. They're attempting to sell a portion of the business. I paused. To whom? A private equity group, she said. but they're misrepresenting operational stability. I leaned back in my chair. Misrepresentation was familiar territory. What does that have to do with me? I asked. Your systems, she replied. Your documented processes. Your work is still embedded in the company's valuation, and they're using it. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. They can't do that, I said. They can try, Patricia replied. But if they're claiming assets built by you post-compensation, it opens another door. Another door. I didn't ask which one. I already knew. That afternoon, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. Subject line: Opportunity for collaboration. The sender was Daniel Brooks, managing partner at Northridge Capital. He wanted to talk. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I pulled up the valuation summary Patricia had forwarded earlier. Projections based on systems I designed. Client retention figures attributed to internal management efficiencies. Internal. They were selling my spine while pretending I'd never existed. I agreed to the call. Daniel was smooth, confident, the kind of man who smiled with his voice. We're impressed with the Whitmore Group's operational maturity, he said, especially given the recent transition. I let him talk. When he finished, I said one sentence. Are you aware that the systems you're valuing were developed and implemented by me, and that I no longer have any affiliation with the company? Silence. I wasn't informed of that, he said carefully. I thought you should be, I replied. Another pause. Would you be open to discussing this further? He asked. Yes, I said, with my attorney present. After the call, Patricia didn't sound surprised. This gives you leverage, she said. Not revenge. Protection. Protection. The thing I'd never been offered before. Within days, Northridge requested independent verification of operational claims. My parents panicked. Hannah called me 3 times in one afternoon. I didn't answer. Then, my mother showed up again. This time, she was crying before she spoke. You're going to ruin us, she said. I stood in the doorway, unmoved. I'm not doing anything, I replied. I stopped letting you speak for me. She shook her head. Why are you doing this? I looked at her. Really looked. The woman who had taught me to be accommodating, to make myself smaller for the sake of peace. Because you taught me to tell the truth, I said. I'm finally doing that. She left without another word. The sale stalled. Northridge withdrew interest quietly. No accusations, just due diligence that didn't add up. 2 weeks later, the Whitmore Group announced internal layoffs, not revenge. Consequence: I didn't celebrate. I didn't comment. I focused on my own growth. Then, on a warm Thursday evening, I received a message that changed the shape of things again. From my Aunt Claire, my mother's older sister, the one who'd moved out west years ago and rarely got involved. Can we talk? She wrote. I think there's something you should know about your grandmother. We met at a quiet cafe the next day. Claire looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that suggested carrying secrets. I didn't agree with what your parents did, she said without preamble. And neither did your grandmother. My heart skipped. She knew? I asked. Claire nodded. She tried to change it back, but by then, your father had power of attorney. The room seemed to tilt. There's more, Claire continued. Your grandmother left something else, not in the will. She reached into her bag and slid a small key across the table. A safety deposit box, she said. She asked me to give this to you if things went the way they did. I stared at the key, my fingers trembling slightly as I picked it up. For the first time since this began, I felt something like anger rise. Not loud, focused. Because if my grandmother had known, if she had tried to protect me in the only way she could, then this story wasn't finished yet. It was just entering a new chapter, and whatever was in that box had been hidden for a reason. I didn't open the safety deposit box right away, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because I understood something instinctively. Whatever my grandmother had left behind wasn't meant to comfort me. It was meant to prepare me. The bank was downtown, the kind of place that still smelled like paper and quiet authority. I went alone, no lawyer, no witnesses, just me and a key that felt heavier than it should have. The clerk checked my ID, then disappeared behind a door. When she returned, she led me to a small private room and slid a narrow metal box onto the table. "There you are," she said, smiling politely, then left. The lock turned easily. Inside were 3 things: a handwritten letter, a flash drive, and a folded document that I recognized instantly, even before I read the header. An unsigned will. My grandmother's handwriting was unmistakable, slanted slightly to the right, firm, deliberate. I unfolded the letter first. "Lauren, if you're reading this, it means I didn't manage to protect you the way I wanted to. I'm sorry for that. I trusted the wrong people to do the right thing, and I see now that trust was misplaced. You were always the steady one, the one who carried weight quietly. I worried that would be used against you, and it seems I was right." The will enclosed reflects my intentions before things were changed, without my full understanding. The drive contains notes, dates, and conversations I kept. Once I realized I was losing control, I didn't know what else to do except document the truth. "I don't want you to burn the family down. I want you to stand where you belong, without asking permission. Whatever you decide, know this: I saw you, even when others pretended not to. Love, Grandma." I sat there for a long time after reading it. Not crying, just breathing. The unsigned will named both Hannah and me as equal beneficiaries. Ownership of the business split evenly. Decision-making authority shared, with a clause that allowed for buyout if one party chose to exit. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair. The flash drive contained more than I expected. Audio recordings, short ones. Conversations my grandmother had quietly recorded once she began to feel uncertain. My father explaining that Lauren doesn't need ownership, she already has purpose. My mother reassuring her that this will keep the peace. Hannah's voice, younger, sharper, saying, "She'll be fine, she always is." And then my grandmother's voice, tired but clear. "That's not kindness," she said. "That's convenience." I didn't leave the bank angry. I left focused. Patricia listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back slowly. "This changes things," she said. "Legally?" I asked. "Potentially," she replied. "But more importantly, strategically." The unsigned will couldn't replace the amended one on its own. But combined with the recordings, the timeline, and my grandmother's documented concerns, it painted a picture that no mediator or judge could ignore. "This isn't about inheritance anymore," Patricia continued. "This is about intent and interference." Interference, a word that carried weight. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I didn't answer right away, because for the first time, the choice was actually mine. Over the next week, my family unraveled in quieter ways. The company didn't collapse, but it shrank. Clients moved on. Employees stopped defending leadership decisions. The sense of inevitability, the belief that Whitmore Group would always exist simply because it always had, began to crack. Then came Easter, a holiday my family had always treated like a performance. Pastel dresses, forced smiles, a table set to suggest unity. My mother sent a message. "We'd like you to come. Just family." I read it twice. Then I replied, "I'll come, but I won't pretend." When I arrived, the house felt smaller. Hannah avoided me. My father looked older than I remembered. My mother busied herself in the kitchen, speaking too loudly about nothing. We sat at the table. Plates were passed. Silence stretched. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Your aunt spoke to you," he said. I nodded. "She did." My mother froze. "You have the box," Hannah said flatly. "Yes," I replied. Her jaw tightened. You're really going to do this, aren't you?
Do what? I asked. Expose us, she snapped. After everything we've been through.
I set my fork down carefully. You mean after everything you decided without me? My father raised his voice. We did what we thought was best.
For control, I said. Not for me.
My mother's eyes filled with tears. Why can't you just let this go? Because letting it go is what put me here, I thought. Instead, I said, I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for acknowledgement.
Hannah laughed bitterly. You always want to be the victim.
I looked at her. Really looked.
I was never the victim, I said.
I was the solution you took for granted.
That shut her up.
I stood.
I'm filing a formal challenge, I said calmly.
Not to take everything, but to correct the record. And I'm prepared to let a judge hear my grandmother's words, if that's what it takes.
My father's face went pale. You'd do that to us? He asked.
I met his eyes. You already did it to me. I left before dessert. The filing happened 2 days later. Quietly. Precisely. With evidence attached. No press. No announcements. Just truth entering a system designed to respond to it. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in months. Because whatever happened next, it wouldn't be shaped by fear or obligation. It would be shaped by choice. And my grandmother's voice, finally heard, would make sure of that. The court didn't react the way my family expected. There was no immediate explosion. No summons splashed across the news. No dramatic knock on anyone's door. What happened instead was far more unsettling. The probate judge assigned to the case requested additional documentation. Not from me, from my parents. Medical records, email correspondence, timelines explaining why the will was amended when it was and who initiated the changes. Statements clarifying the scope of my father's power of attorney and how it had been exercised. In legal terms, it was called a request for clarification. In human terms, it was called suspicion. Patricia explained it to me over coffee in her office. Judges don't ask questions like this unless something already feels off, she said. Your grandmother's recordings created doubt. Now the court wants to know if that doubt is justified. I nodded, absorbing the weight of it. For years, my parents had spoken with authority simply because no one challenged them. Now, someone with actual power was asking them to explain themselves. And explanations are dangerous when you've relied on silence. The first crack came from an unexpected place. Hannah called me. Not angry, not defensive, tired. I didn't know, she said, as soon as I answered. About the recordings. About Grandma trying to change things back. I stayed quiet. They showed me the court request, she continued. Mom's been crying nonstop. Dad barely speaks. I waited. They're saying you manipulated her, Hannah said, that you turned her against us at the end. I exhaled slowly. Did you listen to the recordings? There was a pause. Yes, she admitted. All of them. And? I asked. Her voice cracked. She sounds clear. Clear. The one thing they hadn't expected. I didn't ask for this, Hannah said. I didn't want it to get this far. I didn't either, I replied. But I also didn't choose to be erased. Silence. Then, quietly, what happens now? I leaned back in my chair, looking out at the city. Now, I said, the truth does whatever it does. We hung up without resolving anything. That night, my Aunt Claire emailed me something I hadn't known existed. An old spreadsheet my grandmother kept, tracking distributions, investments, and notes. In the margins were handwritten observations, names, concerns. Next to my father's name, she'd written one sentence. Thinks he knows better than me. Next to my mother's, means well. Avoids conflict. Next to Hannah's, too young to see consequences. And next to mine, reliable to a fault. Must protect her from that. I closed the file and sat very still. Protection doesn't always look like rescue. Sometimes it looks like leaving evidence behind and trusting someone to use it when the time comes.
The hearing was scheduled for early June,
Not a full trial, a preliminary review.
but it required testimony.
My father would have to answer questions under oath. The week before, my mother came to see me one last time. She looked like someone who hadn't slept. "We can fix this," she said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table. "We can amend things quietly, split assets, avoid court." I studied her face.
Why now? I asked.
"Because this is getting dangerous," she whispered. "Your father could lose everything." I nodded. So could the truth. She reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't hold hers either. "You always take things so far," she said softly. I met her eyes. "No, I just don't stop where it's convenient for you." She left without another word. At the hearing, the judge listened more than he spoke. Patricia presented the recordings, the unsigned will. The timeline showing my grandmother's decline was not as severe as claimed at the time of amendment. My father's attorney argued intent, protection, family harmony. Then, my father took the stand. Watching him answer questions was like watching someone speak a language they'd never needed to learn before. Precision, accountability, consequences. He contradicted himself twice. Not dramatically, just enough. Enough for the judge to pause. Enough to ask one final question. "Mr. Whitmore," the judge said, "did your mother ever express concern that Lauren was being excluded unfairly?" My father hesitated too long. "Yes," he said finally. "She did." The room went silent. That was it. Not a ruling. Not yet, but a crack wide enough to let everything else through. Afterward, outside the courthouse, Hannah stood apart from our parents. When she saw me, she didn't approach. She just nodded once. Something unspoken passed between us. Not forgiveness, not alignment. Acknowledgement. Patricia squeezed my arm. "You did well," she said. I felt tired, but clean. Whatever happened next would not erase what had already been established. That I hadn't imagined it. That my grandmother hadn't been confused. That control had been dressed up as care. In the weeks that followed, settlement talks resumed, this time on different terms. The offer wasn't equal ownership. It wasn't an apology. It was something else. A formal correction filed with the court. An acknowledgement that the amended will did not fully reflect my grandmother's intent. A structured compensation package tied directly to my contributions. And a written statement entered into record, affirming that my exclusion had been procedural, not deserved. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. I accepted. Not because I needed the money, but because the record matters. When it was done, the Whitmore Group sold within the year. Not at the valuation they'd hoped for, not to a group that believed in family legacy, just to survive. I didn't attend the closing dinner. I was busy living a life that no longer required me to disappear. And that, I realized, was the quietest kind of victory. After the settlement was finalized, people expected me to feel triumphant. They were wrong. What I felt instead was something far more disorienting. Space. For most of my adult life, my days had been shaped around reacting to other people's needs, smoothing over tension, anticipating conflict before it could surface. Even the fight for myself had been a response, not a desire. Now that it was over, the silence felt unfamiliar. Not empty, unclaimed. The Whitmore Group sale was announced quietly. A short press release, no celebration, no legacy language, just numbers and restructuring terms. Hannah stayed on for a few months in a reduced role. My parents retired earlier than planned. No one asked me to attend anything. That, more than the legal outcome, told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't missed as a person. I was missed as a function. The realization didn't hurt the way it once would have. It settled, heavy but manageable, like a truth you stop tripping over once you name it. My consulting business grew steadily. I chose my clients carefully. No family-owned companies, no vague ownership structures, no roles that relied on goodwill instead of contracts. Every agreement was clear, every responsibility defined.
People sometimes asked about my background.
I left a family business, I'd say.
I didn't elaborate unless they asked.
One afternoon, several months later, I received a calendar invitation from Hannah.
Coffee.